Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Philosopher's Rant. Today we're going to talk about the shutdown and the compromise and negotiation going on around Trump's border wall. Right now the government is shut down, has been for I think 17 days. And because Trump wants $5 billion for his border wall, which Democrats don't want to give him. The what we're going to talk about is the logic behind the wall and whether or not it'll work, and B, the philosophy behind negotiation and compromise. The question that is usually asked is, why can't they just compromise? Why don't you give $5 billion for Trump's wall in exchange for something that Democrats want, like maybe the DACA program, which is what's been floated around. For those of you that don't know what DACA is, it is the compromise for undocumented immigrants that came here against their will, usually children. Their parents brought them over when they were very young. When people, commentators, pundits, and citizens talk about compromise, they usually talk about one side getting a little of what they want and the other side getting a little bit of what they want, so a deal can be reached and progress can be made. The compromise, no, that's compromise for compromise's sake. As if simply compromising will actually solve the specific problem at hand. In this case, giving Trump his $5 billion solve the issues of immigration and open up the government again. Now, while compromise is important, especially to governance, just because we compromise or a compromise was made doesn't mean it's a good policy or that your goals are going to be reached. It doesn't mean that compromise is actually a good thing. Okay. As for the wall itself, it's a terrible idea. It has always been a terrible idea. The question is why. The first reason is it's not going to work. We know it's not going to work. The U.S.-Mexico border is 2,000 miles long. And you can't build a wall that long because of the terrain that's involved. And DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, doesn't want a wall that long. They want about 1,000 miles of barriers. They don't want a contiguous wall going from coast to coast. The other problem is that there are natural water boundaries on either side. You have the Pacific Ocean in the west, and you have the Gulf of Mexico in the east. And you're not going to be able to build there, which brings us to another issue with building the wall, which is people are going to go around it, under it, and through it, and over it. It's why you constantly have the jokes of, okay, we build the wall, and people are just going to bring a taller ladder. How do we know that this is what's going to happen? Because it's how people have gotten around walls since the beginning of time. Okay? Not to mention, drug cartels have actually been sending people through or over the border legally to purchase buildings, and then they'll dig a tunnel from one of their buildings in Mexico up through and underneath the floor of the building they just bought in the United States, and they'll bring in contraband, drugs, and human trafficking through the tunnel. And it just looks like people are coming in and out of the building from the outside, as if nothing nefarious is going on. So it just doesn't work that way. The wall is not actually going to stop illegal immigration. The second problem is that it goes against American values. The entire idea of the United States is so that immigrants can come here for a new life. It's the entire reason why the Pilgrims came here. Okay? They said, we're sick of England, we want to be able to worship the way that we want to worship, so we're going to go to this new land so that we can do that. That has always been the promise of America. Okay? And as a result, we are a nation of immigrants. And because of that, by building a wall, we're sending a terrible message to the rest of the world, especially Mexico. And what it does is it really harms not only our image, but also our foreign policy. How can we expect other countries to be more inclusive and accepting and respectful of human rights when we refuse to do so, especially when we are violating these immigrants' human rights to seek asylum? Under international law, they have a legal and human right to seek asylum. And just because they seek asylum does not mean that they will get it, but they do have a right to ask, and that right is not contingent upon them asking first and then coming over. This isn't what Cuban Americans did when they were escaping Castro. They left Cuba first and then came to the United States and then asked for asylum. So that is perfectly acceptable if they do that. Okay. You don't have to ask for asylum from your country of origin and then come over. And the reason is because why many people ask for asylum is because their life's in danger. Well, you get away from the danger first, then you seek the asylum. Okay? And the argument against that, against coming to the country first and then seeking asylum is, well, they broke the law. But that's not a good enough argument. First, it's only a misdemeanor. Okay? It's basically a parking ticket. A person should not have to lose everything they have, and especially not be separated from their family just because they crossed the border. Nor should someone be sent back to a potential death sentence just because they crossed an imaginary line, which is what the border is. There's also a significant question about whether or not our immigration policy is morally sound. Regardless of what legal positivists think, and I'll cover that in a later video, all of law is based upon morality. And moral questions about our immigration policy need to be addressed. So we have a right to address those questions, and by virtues of civil disobedience, you actually do have a right to break a law that is morally unjust. And saying that a person cannot cross the border just because it's the law when their life is in danger is a morally unjust law. So the argument that they are breaking the law just doesn't work. The third problem and issue that we have to deal with is that if Democrats give in to Trump now, it'll set a very bad precedent later on. Anytime Trump doesn't get his way, doesn't get what he wants, he could simply shut down the government. And that's not a message you want to send to Trump, because he doesn't have a moral bone in his body. And he does not give a damn about those federal workers who are either out of work or not getting paid while they do work. Not to mention the federal contractors who aren't going to get recouped for the lost time at all, especially considering that a lot of those federal contractors work for very low pay, if not minimum wage. Now, I feel bad for those federal workers. I don't want them to be going through this. But the problem is the country has to come first. The republic has to come first. And this is what standing up to Trump looks like. And I'm sorry that you federal workers have to suffer in order to do that. It's not fair. It shouldn't be happening. But if we don't do it now, we're going to have much, much bigger problems later on. Because Trump, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, Trump is a significant threat to democracy as a whole. And this is exactly what standing up to Trump looks like. And the problem is, it's only going to get worse before it gets better. But we have to start somewhere. So, giving the wall, or giving in on the wall, giving Trump his money, creates a policy that won't work, that compromises our values and our international standing, violates human rights, and sets a bad precedent for a wannabe dictator. There are much better ways to spend $5 billion, even on border security. And border security is a serious issue which should be wholly and deeply considered, so we can come up with something that actually solves problems instead of failing to solve problems and creating new ones in the process. There are two final points I want to make. When two sides are in a negotiation, both have to be flexible and compromise, or negotiation falls apart unless one side can force the other side to capitulate. But when one side becomes absolutist about their position and they're unwilling to budge, the other side actually has no choice but to do the same thing, or they will not get anything they want. And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what Trump did. Give me $5 billion or I will shut down the government. Period. All other offers for a lower amount for border security have been rejected. So Democrats are forced to simply say no because of Trump's all or nothing position. Lastly, many have said, well, Trump was elected, and it's what the American people want. First, the phrase, what the American people want, is usually a lie. In this case, it's what Trump supporters want, not the majority of Americans, whom are actually against building the wall. Second, yes, Trump won, and it might be what his supporters want. But just because a choice is made doesn't mean that it's a good choice. And Trump supporters made a terrible choice by electing Trump. And I'll get into the issue of choice in a later video, choice in democracy. But the idea that simply because something is chosen through a democratic process, that choice is actually the right choice, is factually, morally, and logically incorrect. It's wrong. There's always the question of whether or not a choice that is made is actually the correct choice. And in this case, Trump and his policies are absolutely the wrong choice in every instance and in every sense of the word. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Philosopher's Rant, and I will see you soon.